Well, it's a short story with 2 characters. So today it'll just be an introduction. I'm going to show you the materials that I'll be using later. Firstly, the erasers, 1 for general erasing and 2 that are a little more precise for fine details. Pens of different thickness for inking, an X-Acto knife to cut the screen tones, and some correction fluid. Here are the screen tones with different patterns for clothes or backdrops, and the canson paper, my artboards, which I'll use later with the ruler. So the first thing to do is the storyboard. It's a kind of summary of the layout for positioning the bits and pieces where we need them without making mistakes. If we draw directly onto the artboard, we risk having to rub everything out and damaging the paper, which that would be a shame. In manga, we're allowed to have panels of different sizes, and they don't have to be straight. In fact, it's even recommended because otherwise it can be a bit boring to read. There we are. Here I'm marking out the borders. Don't be afraid to space out the panels because we've got the room, and not sticking everything together makes it easier to understand. What's important with the characters is to stick to the proportions. I always start with the head and mark where the drawing is supposed to end so that I don't have to finish it at the very bottom of the page at the last minute. Once I've done the outlines of the character, I can do her clothes, paying attention to the places where they crease or stretch, like the pleats of a skirt. In general, close-up on the eyes show the character's emotions. You shouldn't hesitate to use them if you want to emphasize something. What I'm going to do now is called an SD, a super deformed way to convey emotion. It's typical of mangas. It's sort of humorous. We draw the same character but smaller and with exaggerated features. For example, big angry eyes, big mouth, or a round head. Here's a new character coming in. We start by just showing a part of him before showing all of him. That builds up the suspense as well as making him a bit more mysterious. Afterwards, once we've done the shapes in a bit more depth, we can add details. And in fact, what we're doing here will be used for the inking. For inking, I've got 3 different pens. In general, I ink the panels with the thickest. Then for the rest, I tend to use the middle one. So when we ink, we have to be careful not to do the outlines, but for example, to do an item of clothing as a whole, because it can be difficult to make out the difference. For example, I'm going to do the sleeve, but not the arm with it, so that they're separate from one another. Then we erase the pencil lines, and it's them that we see what we've forgotten to ink, and we can add the small details that are missing. Now we're going to move on to the screen tones. We're going to start with the grey shades, which are either shadows or the blocks of grey colour that we need. We take the X-Acto knife, we place the screen tone on the part that we want to shade, these buildings for example, and we cut a general shape that's a bit bigger. Then, using the tip, we remove the part of the screen tone that we need, and we place it on the paper. And then, again using the X-Acto knife, we cut out the exact shape that we need. And in the same way, we remove the excess bits of screen tone, and afterwards we can always reuse these little bits for small parts that don't need so much screen tone. Don't hesitate to leave a little on the face, because it can look good, and we can also change it as much as we want. Like there, for example, it stops a bit too abruptly, so that we can cut it off or scrape it off. There you have it. We can see the details, but they'll disappear once we've scanned the artboard for printing. The shoujo screen tones, as I call them, they're the small stars, blends, things that convey romance and create an atmosphere, in fact. One last little detail, we can center the lines of action to focus attention on the character. We choose a central point. Personally, I choose the point there between the eyes, and then by converging lines around the character, It also makes it possible to follow the movement in certain scenes. My tip for finishing touch is correction fluid. We can put reflections in the characters' eyes so that they stand out a bit better. And we can also add light effects like here in the trees. And it can also be used on the screen tone to create some nice shading. There we are.